Good morning. Welcome to the webinar for the proposed changes to EMR backing data. We're just going to give it a couple more minutes. We're just waiting for some more of the attendees to join, and then we'll start the presentation. Good morning. We seem to have a couple more attendees joining, but I think I'll kick off the presentation. So welcome to the proposed changes to EMR backing data presented by EMR Settlement. This is being presented by my colleague Ben Lathbury and myself, Anthony Cross. We're both business analysts working in the change function of EMR Settlement. So here's just a disclaimer. I'll leave it on the screen for a short while just for you to have a quick read through of that. So what are we covering off this morning? What's the agenda? So one of the things we've got is the questions box. We're going to be going through this, and there's quite a lot of detail to go through. If you've got any questions, could you raise them in the questions box? And we've got sections where we can just pick up the questions. If we can, we'll give you a response to those. If not, what we'll do is take them away, get the information put together, and then we can respond to you following on from the webinar. We've got a background on what we're doing with the backing data for the D flows and the T files, and why we're making the changes to them. And then we're going to cover off the scope of the change. So my colleague Ben will go into a bit more detail of what we're actually changing, which flows we're changing and files, and also what we're doing within those flows and files. So which items and groups we're either adding, renaming, etc. And he'll go into the details of that. What we'll then do is go on to the timeline. So when is this going to be happening, and the sort of different stages that we'll go through to implement the changes. So background on where we are with regards to our system and the backing data and the T files. So this slide just demonstrates the evolution of the system. We started with the two schemes, so with the contracts for differences and then the capacity market. Following on from that, there's been quite a lot of development within the system. So it hasn't just sort of stood still. We've had a lot of changes, releases, and various functionality that's been added to the core system. A lot of this has impacted the calculations that we make within it, and also the information that we output in the form of invoices, but also the backing data and the T files. We've got a constant pipeline of change, and several of these factors have influenced the changes that have been made in the D flows and T files, and I'll come on to that in the next slide. But going back over the changes, we haven't made any changes to the backing data itself since 2017. Since then, we've had a mock stress event and another 4 releases going into the system. And as you can see, it was followed up by another 4 releases in 2019, the same in 2020, and then another 3 releases in 2021. So that brings us to 18 releases in total and 137 changes that we've made. A lot of this doesn't impact the backing data or the T files, but there are a significant number of items in there that do. You could raise the point, why have we not done more changes to the backing data or the T files? And there's a couple of reasons for that. As you can see, the pipeline of change that we've been making is quite full. There have been a lot of changes that have had to go into the system, and that obviously takes up a lot of the development time, actually making the changes to the system itself, as well as the standstill that we had. The other thing is the length of delivery. So when we make any changes to any of the backing data, it is a reasonably lengthy process. Obviously, we need to go out to industry to make sure that the changes are sort of acceptable and relevant to what's required, and it's quite a long process to get it all signed off and implemented, which makes it very difficult to do sort of on a short iterative cycle. The other thing that we're conscious of is disruption to yourselves as the EMR parties. If we were constantly making changes and updates, we'd have to be constantly feeding that information out to yourselves to react to. So what we've done is brought it all together in the changes that we're making, which are outlined in this presentation. So why are we making changes to the backing data? There's 4 sort of key reasons. As I mentioned on the previous slide, the system has had a lot of changes put into it. These have not only meant that there have been sort of functional changes within it, but also calculations and other elements that we now need to get put onto the backing data that we send out. There have been regulatory scheme changes. So this will include additional items that we now factor in, which include items such as relevant expenditure and relevant benefit. We've also got some references in some of the files to net volumes, and we need to make sure that those are now gross volumes. We also had a lessons learnt from the mock stress event. Now we have got a separate webinar on that, which is on the 24th of March, and that will focus on the actual details of what we're going to be doing for that information. But there's now a lot more information that we can provide and give a lot more detail through the stress event. And this has had a knock-on to existing flows, which we'll cover today. And as I mentioned, there is also going to be a stress event specific file that we will go through in the next webinar. The other thing is to help with queries that we get in via the help desk. We do get a number of queries into the operations help desk, often about the backing data, and there are some specific queries about how it's presented, specifically around the T files. So the changes that we're making with regards to those, as Ben will go through, looking to improve the ease of understanding the information in there, as well as adding the extra details in there. So hopefully it'll make resolution of any queries that come in, or any queries that you might have, more easy to resolve. So that's the introduction, what we're doing, why we're doing it. I'm going to hand over to Ben, and we'll have a couple of sort of checkpoints in the slides that he's going to go through, which will give you a chance, or give us a chance to respond, if we can, to the questions that you raise. So over to you, Ben.
Thank you, Anthony. Before I kick off, obviously, before I kick off with the CFD supplier section, I just wanted to take a moment just to thank everybody who responded to the SPF 107. So at the back end of 2020, we sent out a solution proposal form 107, which was the reporting of additional EMR backing data to suppliers. This went out with an earlier iteration of the changes that we plan to make to the D flows specifically. We've got some great feedback on that, specifically from Tim Parry at St Clement's around the D366 and the parent-child relationships, which we're going to come on to later. So that was appreciated. And also from the team at RWE Supply and Trading, who provided some great feedback again around the 366, which I think will become apparent is the flow where the vast majority of these changes are taking place, and that was specifically around the groups 59L, 60L and 61L that they use for their auto invoicing validation, and could they be kept? And obviously, you know, we've incorporated all that feedback into this latest proposal that we've sent across to the MRA change team that we're just getting ready at the moment before it goes across to the rec manager. But I'll come on and cover a bit more of that later on. So I'll start, as Anthony mentioned, we split this into sections. So the first section is the information that's pertinent to CFD supplier. So obviously the flows we've got in question here are the D0362, which is the CFD supplier invoice backing data, and the D0363, which is the CFD supplier credit cover report. The two T files that sort of run hand in hand with these are the T004, so the CFD supplier quarterly reconciliation, and the T018, which is the CFD supplier collateral statement. So they're the flows and T files in question for this section. Anthony, can you move on to the next slide, please? So if I just go through it flow and file at a time. So if we look at the D0362, we're making changes to two existing groups and adding a further group. So I'll just go through some of the detail around that. So if you look at the group 60I, the CFD quarterly reconciliation payment, we're making changes to this to provide all the necessary information to further validate quarterly reconciliation amounts. So we're adding two new data items to this, which are net quarterly interest contribution and net quarterly interest contribution adjustment. So the net quarterly interest contribution, this is the supplier's share of late payment interest received from suppliers or paid to CFDs for a quarterly obligation period. And the adjustment is an adjustment arising from the recalculation of a previous quarterly obligation period's net quarterly interest contribution. Quite a mouthful, but yeah, we're just adding those data items to provide extra visibility. The group 63I, daily net generator payment, we're adding one new data item to that, which is daily net generator compensatory interest. So we're putting this in just to show CFD suppliers what they're actually funding. So it's the compensatory interest paid to a CFD generator on any reconciliation amount for a CFD. That's just to provide more information. And then we've got a new group that we're adding, which is a CFD operational cost refund. Then this is being added to provide all the information so you can do the breakdowns of all your payments, specifically EII. So we've got three new data items that we're adding to that, which is the CFD fiscal year, the CFD operational cost levy total refund amount, and the CFD operational cost levy supplier refund amount. So obviously the CFD fiscal year is the first year of the fiscal year, so April through to March. The total refund amount is a supplier's share of any CFD operational cost levy total refund amount. And then the supplier refund amount is as instructed by a CFD counterparty, the excess of operational cost levy collected from suppliers for a fiscal year that has been refunded to suppliers. Now, the theory behind that is just to provide that extra level of detail if anybody wanted to do any further validation of the payment, just giving that extra level of detail. That new group also has four existing data items in there, which are the reference period supply charge demand, the reference period total charge demand, and the reference period supplier EII excluded demand, and the reference period total EII excluded demand, just to give you that full picture. Thank you, Anthony. So this brings us on to the D0363. In this, we're adding 3 existing data items to a new group, to an existing group. This is 69I, which is the minimum credit cover detail. The reason behind this is to provide more detail, and again, aid in any validation that CFD suppliers would be wanting to do. So the 3 existing data items that we're adding are the CFD levy rate, the CFD daily supply charge demand, and the CFD daily supplier EII excluded demand. Appreciate that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour through those first 2 flows, but has anybody got any questions that they'd like to raise just on that CFD supplier section?
Hi Ben, we've got no questions that have come through, but yeah, if anyone has, then please do, and we could pick those up at the next stop.
Yeah, I appreciate, you know, with this webinar, it is myself and Anthony going through the actual detail that's described, but it does make a lot more sense when you actually see the DTC and the T file sort of change proposals in hard copy, so you can comment on that. But we'll come on to that later. But yeah, if anybody's got any questions, please just fire them across. I just in terms of the 362 and the 363, it's just essentially adding further data items to help the validation of any payments. Okay, so there's no questions on that section. I'll move on to the CFD generator. So the flows that are in question for this section are the D0365, which is the CFD generator invoice backing data, and the T025, which is the T-file CFD generator billing statement. Thank you, Anthony. Okay, to go on the next slide. So in terms of the 365, we've got 3 new data items that we're adding to a group, 88I. We've got 2 new data items that we're adding to 89I, the CFD settlement unit, and then a new group, CFD metered entity settlement unit. So I'll just go into a bit of detail regarding those. So in terms of 88I, you can see that we're adding phase multiplier, phase total installed, and project total capacity. And this is obviously the regulatory piece around how we are going to report out for phase projects and provide data for those. So the phase multiplier, that's the portion of the metering configuration volume for a phased project that relates to a specific contract for difference. The phase multiplier is determined from the phase total installed capacity divided by the project total installed capacity on each settlement day. You've got the phased total installed, so that's the total of the metering configuration volume for a phased project that relates to a specific contract for difference. Obviously, the calculation is the same. And then the third new data item that we're adding there is the project total installed capacity, and that's for a settlement day, the latest version of the turbine installed capacity for a phased active turbine. And then in brackets, any turbines which export electricity at any time during the settlement day. So that is just to give full visibility of all the phase projects and providing backing data for that. Group 89I, obviously we've got 2 new data items that we're adding to that group, rolling negative price period, a maximum contract capacity. We're adding these to aid invoice validation. So if you look at the rolling negative price period, that's a settlement unit for a contract for difference which is within a rolling negative price period. And then the maximum contract capacity. This is the maximum contract capacity at a settlement date for a contract for difference. The new group which we're adding, so CFD metered entity settlement unit. Essentially, this group is being added so you can see how the volumes that are used are being derived. So we've got 4 data items in this new group, 2 of which are new, which are going to be metered entity ID and metered entity volume. So obviously a metered entity ID, so that's a metered entity that can reflect any metered entity type used in a metering configuration for EMR settlement, be that a BMU, an MPAN or an MSID. And then we've got metered entity, metered volume, which is again the metered volume for that metered entity. The 2 existing data items we're adding on that are the transmission loss multiplier and the line loss factor. Obviously, this is just again to provide you with further information to validate calculations and the invoices and things that you receive.
No questions, I'm afraid, Ben.
Okay, just have a drink of water.
No problem. I'll keep you posted.
Yes, please do. So, yeah, which brings us on to the 364. So for the CM supplier, the 364 is the CM supplier invoice backing data, and the T files that is associated with are the T044, which is the CM supplier costs levy revision, the T045, which is the CM supplier cost levy monthly, the T046, the CM supplier charge invoice, the T049, which is the CM supplier mutualization invoice, and the T105, which is the CM supplier reconciliation of credit amounts. So Anthony, if you can go onto the next slide. Quite a lot of changes to groups, specifically group names, and item descriptions. But as Anthony touched on in his introduction, it's not as sort of busy as it seems. This is to remove a reference to net demand. Obviously, we still have got that reference to net demand in all of these items, descriptions and names, and obviously that's not what is being produced on the output. So essentially, what it is that we're calling these things doesn't match back to what's actually in the backing data itself. So we need to make that change just so that the actual output is referenced to what's actually in the calculation. Now, in terms of the T files that we've got in here, we do receive quite a lot of queries into the help desk regarding calculations, breaking things down from gross and net, and quite a lot of the time it is the fact that when people are doing sort of their invoice reconciliations and validations, they are using the incorrect volume, but you know that's not their fault. It's the fact that what the backing data is telling them that it is doesn't correspond with the output. So there's various different routes as to why we're taking this sort of housekeeping step. One is for it to represent what's actually in the output, and also it's to further aid the validation on people when they're trying to get back to what it is that the numbers are telling them. So I'll just quickly run through the groups. So if there's any reference to net demand in group names, item names, or the item description, that's going to be removed. So that is in group 72I, the CM settlement cost levy. That's in group 73I, the CM net demand daily detail. Group 74I, the CM net demand period detail. Group 76I, the CM net demand daily detail. Group 77I, the CM net demand period detail, 46L, the CM net demand forecast detail, 81I, the CM utilization payment, 82I, CM net demand daily detail, 83I, CM net demand period detail, and CM net demand forecast detail. So we've got quite a bit that we're changing there. For 75I, we're changing the group name. So this isn't, we're changing the group name to CM supplier charge payment because that makes more sense. But also in that group, any references that have got to net demand will be removed. And then we're adding one new data item to group 49L, which will be the total amount invoiced to suppliers. So in the context of EMR arrangements, that will be the total amount of money invoiced to all suppliers for a particular invoice run. So we're doing that and adding that to help with any scaling calculations that might be done by any of you guys offline.
You must be making complete sense, Ben. We have no questions. They're all understanding.
Well, I think it's all coming down to the 366, which I think is
yeah, it is. I think everyone's waiting in anticipation for the next.
which is the one which has had the most tinkering with, just due to the fact that there's a lot of functionality that we're wanting to add, and also when Anthony touched on the mock stress event, a lot of the data that will be provided for a mock stress event will be provided on this flow. So you know, it's a case, I don't want to steal the thunder from the session on the 24th, but it is a case that we're going to be removing some of the stuff from this flow and putting that on a sort of stress event specific T file. But there'll be more on that on the 24th. So for the D366, which is the CM capacity provider invoice backing data, that corresponds with the T062.
Sorry, Ben, I'm going to just interrupt. I do have a question. Rolling negative price period, does this impact the difference amount calculation?
It's a good question. I think without looking at the specifics of the design piece, I wouldn't like to comment and give an incorrect answer, but I think what we've done is we've obviously built up data models that have got the output for these new data items and whereabouts within our EMR settlement system they're calculated. So we can take that question and look back and see what calculations and what parts of the system that new data item interacts with, and we can give a more detailed response.
No problem at all. Absolutely fine. Thank you, Ben. I'll let you carry on. Sorry.
That's my train of thought now, Hannah. Right, so yeah, capacity provider. So this is the one, and as I talked on before, this is when we sent out the SPF 107 back at the back end of 2020. This is the one where we got the most feedback and have had to make a few sort of subsequent changes just to incorporate that in terms of the ordering and a couple of the groups. So yeah, the D366 is, as I said, the CM capacity provider invoice backing data, and that corresponds with the T062, which is the CM monthly capacity payment credit note, the T063, which is the CM capacity provider penalty charge invoice, the T064, which is the CM over delivery credit note, the T65, which is the CM capacity agreement termination, and the T107, which is the CM capacity provider recalculation of credit amounts. So it's quite a busy flow, and there's a lot of out of them all, this is the one that we're making the most proposed changes to. Hence why it's over a good number of slides to come. So Anthony, are you all right to move on to the next slide, please? Right, so I'll just go through this. Two new groups to start with. So the first new group is the capacity payment month, which has got 3 existing data items, which is the CM month ID, the total amount received from suppliers, and the total amount payable to capacity providers. Now, the second new group is the CM month ID, the capacity payment suspension start date, and capacity payment suspension start end. So let's go to the. So the reason why we're doing this is making just a restructuring of the parent-child relationships within the flow. So when we're looking at that, we're wanting to link everything back to a month and make it more clear that the information links back to a CMU ID and a month, whereas we get a lot of queries, as to what period in time does this actually refer to, and that's why those inclusions of those groups at the top are to rectify the feedback that we get from a good number of parties as to what period does this sort of ascertain to. So that's the theory behind those two being included at the top. For group 95I, which is the CM capacity payment, we've got 3 data items that obviously we're removing from that group and pushing into the new group at the top. We've got 2 new data items that we're adding, which are capacity agreement and monthly capacity payment payable. And then we've got 1 data item that we're changing the name of. So if you look at group 95I, the 2 new data items, the capacity agreement and monthly capacity payment payable. So the capacity agreement is a unique identifier as used in the capacity market register maintained by the delivery body for a capacity agreement arising from a capacity market auction. So that's included just so you can trace it back to that register if you ever needed to. The monthly capacity payment payable, that's the monthly payment payable after any scaling required. So as a result, a shortfall in supplier charge funds available to a capacity provider in relation to a capacity obligation by a CMU. And the 1 data item in there that we're changing the name of is the monthly capacity payment, and we're adding due to the end. So it's going to be the monthly capacity payment due, and that is just better. We're adding that just to better explain as to what it is. Is essentially not the payment, but it's the amount that's outstanding. So that's being added there. Group 58L, the suspended capacity obligation details. We're removing this group, and you can see that the data items in there are in the new group capacity payment CMU. So it's more appropriate for it to be in there and have that relationship as opposed to be on its own in that standalone group. Anthony, are you okay to go on to the next slide, please? Which takes us on to group 96I, which is the physical traded capacity obligation. We've got 1 data item that we're removing, which is the CM penalty rate, which is going to be incorporated in the new file. It's not appropriate now. We've got 1 new data item that we're changing, and then we've got 1 new data item that we're adding. So for the one that we're changing, it's obviously the same as one above, the monthly capacity payment due, that we're adding due, and then the new data item is the monthly capacity payment payable. And now this is the monthly payment payable after any scaling is required as a shortfall in supplier charge funds available to capacity provider in relation to a capacity obligation by a CMU. Okay, thank you, Anthony. So we've gone to this next slide. You can see, if we missed one there, Anthony, I'm afraid.
Do you need to just go through the new groups?
Yeah. So yeah, some new groups that we're adding here. So we've got a new group, CMU accumulation recovered, and we're taking the term so the accumulation recovered. This is the term accumulation is taken from the actual regulations themselves, and what we're doing here is you can validate any of the state aid payments. So in this we've got relevant expenditure and relevant benefit. So relevant expenditure from a capacity provider's funding declaration for a CMU that has been deducted from capacity payments payable to a capacity provider in order to avoid accumulation of support for the CMU. And then obviously you've got relevant benefit, which is relevant benefit from a capacity provider's funding declaration for a CMU that has been deducted from capacity payments payable to a capacity provider in order to avoid accumulation of support for the CMU. The next new group is recovery of capacity payments. We've got 3 new data items that we're adding here. So monthly capacity payment payable, as we've touched on before, and then the recovery period start and end. And then we've got the CMU accumulation reinstated, which again has got the relevant expenditure and the relevant benefit in, but to be the volumes of that that's been state aid that's been reinstated. Which brings us on to our next new group, which is all around capacity agreement to termination. Now the theory behind this is to provide EMR parties with a lot more information regarding terminations, because at the moment it's pretty limited. So what we're proposing here is 7 new data items. So you've got capacity agreement, CM agreement termination reason, termination fee rate, CM agreement termination date, termination fee date, credit cover drawdown, and net termination fee payable. So I'll just quickly run through those. So for capacity agreement, that's a unique identifier as used in the capacity market register maintained by the delivery body for a capacity agreement arising from a capacity market auction. CM agreement termination reason. This is the primary reason for a capacity agreement being terminated by the delivery body. The termination fee rate. This is the rate of termination fee in megawatts, pounds per megawatt, applying to a CMU capacity obligation at the termination date. The CM agreement termination date. So this is the date for termination of the capacity market agreement as confirmed by the delivery body. The termination fee due is any termination fee due when a capacity agreement is terminated by the delivery body. The credit cover drawdown, so that's any credit cover lodged that is subject to drawdown. And the net termination fee payable, Obviously, that's the net termination fee payable after deduction of any credit cover already drawn down against that termination fee due. So as I said, we do get some queries regarding terminations, and at the moment the backing data that's provided is sort of limited, whereas it's envisaged that this will provide EMR parties with that more in-depth spread of what's actually going on with the terminations, and they can, you know, have that for their own visibility. There's two existing data items in that group as well. Sorry, that's the auction acquired capacity obligation and the physical traded capacity obligation. That's just to complete the complete that group and make sure that you've got everything that you could possibly need. As I mentioned, from the SPF that was sent out, this flow did cause the most. Well, it was the only one really that we got any feedback on, obviously from Tim at St Clement's regarding the sort of parent-child relationships, and he'll be pleased to know have been sort of rectified in the change proposal that we've sent across to the MRA change team. They've just red inked for us just to make sure that all that is as it should be. Then there was also the query from the RWE supply and trading team regarding groups 59L, 60L and 61, that it seems that a lot of parties are using for their sort of automated invoice validation, and could they please be left alone. So that's the case. So there is some differences from what was originally proposed on that SPF form. It's been feedback has been incorporated, and it's been sort of tidied up.
Thank you, Ben. I've got a couple of questions. First one is, when do these changes take place?
I'll come on to that. That's good.
That's next slide.
Next slide, yep.
And then we've got one physically traded capacity obligation, 961 group. How does this fit now with the 951 or 95I? But I think that is that one we'll follow up on.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I don't. You know, we can go into the detail and we'll work at the interactions for that. I think, you know, that'll be good.
No problem at all. And out of interest, Ben, would these questions as well, we could recap these at the webinar as well on the 29th, on the 24th.
Yeah, definitely. Let's,
yeah, okay, cool.
If anybody's got any questions, fire them across, and we can do a recap at that session, which I think would be really good. You know, we've been wanting, before I go on to the next slide, we've been wanting to do these changes for a while, and obviously working with the guys at LCCC and ESC, we've been wanting to do these, but obviously, as Anthony touched on, our change pipeline has been pretty full. So we've got to the point now where we're wanting to do these changes. We have been in sort of constant contact with the MRA around it, and we have obviously done that SPF form just to get people's feedback. And again, thanks for doing that. But we're at a point now where we're wanting to press go. So I think it'd probably be worth now, Hannah or Anthony, clicking onto the next slide so we can just. So yeah, it's just a few points on a page really. So as I say, we've been wanting to do this for a long time. Obviously, things have got in the way. Other changes take precedence. You know, there's been regulatory stuff that we've got to push through and get on top of. So we're at a point now where we're wanting to do this. So we did the SPF form at the back end of last year, and off the back of that, we have got a formal change proposal. We actually submitted one last year, but that got pulled just due to the fact that we had got other stuff that we needed to take precedence. So we sent that across to the MRA change guys. They've sent that back with all the sort of red ink on, specifically around the 366, because I was very keen to make sure that all that sort of parent-child relationship and all the levels and sequencing was correct. So we got that back last Friday. We've got to get that back by the end of this week. And then it's the MRA change team that are going to pass that across to the new rec manager, because obviously the problem we've got here is the governance structure is changing. So whereas before we would just send the change proposal off to the MRA and they would carry it forward and go through their sort of change governance, come June, July time, it obviously switches across to the rec manager. So what we're doing is to make sure that everything is totally in place, get the MRA change team to red ink, make sure the change proposal that's completely watertight, and then they are going to pass it across to the rec manager. But in the meantime, all that the change proposal is in the existing MRA sort of templates and everything, and it will go onto the MRA website for people to digest. But I've got no issue with, once it's been signed off, if people want to have that circulated, I've got no problem with that. We can canvass opinion on that. But that's where we're going at the moment. So that'll all be sorted out, and then what's happening from then is we're wanting to get this change implemented in November, in the November release. But that's our aim. And when we've presented this change, and specifically the feedback from the SPF form at the MRA decision board meetings in December and January, they said that would be that should be fine, that should be doable. But obviously, because it's sort of in that state of flux between the two governance structures, we're just waiting for that to be confirmed. And as soon as we do, there'll be a circular, I presume, Hannah, that we can say yes, this date is 100% happening, and is a goer. We're just wanting to get you guys in on this before that point, just so you can be prepared and be aware that these are the changes that we're looking to make. So yeah, the go live date should be the November release, November 2021, but obviously we're just waiting for some clarification on that. But if that doesn't happen for any reason, we've built into the functionality that we're going to have run with the old versions, but we'll have this that it can be switched on at any time. So we're all going for that November date.
Any updates, Ben, that we get, we will ensure that all EMR parties are kept informed.
Yes, definitely.
Any progress yet following sort of that transition over to the rec manager, etc., and see confirmation for that November release. Yeah, we'll absolutely.
Yeah. So we're pushing to get that as soon as possible, and get that out to everybody. It's just unfortunate that we're doing this when the governance structure has changed, but from our discussions with them, that November date should be fine.
I've got no more questions come in, Ben.
Okay, we've got the webinar as well on the 24th. Don't want to steal the content from that, but that is going to be more specifically around the data that we provide in the event of a stress event, and we'll go into the detail as to what the extra data items are and how they've been derived and how they would help during a stress event. So if there's any questions that come out from this, please get them across to us, and we can do a little short recap session in that webinar just to feedback anything that people might think of afterwards, I presume. Hannah,
Absolutely, by all means, if there is anything, then please do let us know. Following this, the webinar has been recorded, so we'll be able to share that with everyone as well, and also send the slide deck across. So when that comes out, by all means, do respond if there are additional questions. Arguably, we will respond to you before the webinar, but arguably we can bring that to that then as well to share with everyone else.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Really useful.
I think from the feedback that we've had so far, it's all well and good us doing the doing the analysis and then proposing stuff. But you know, the feedback we had specifically from Tim and the guys at RWE was really, really useful. So yeah, any questions, please just get in touch. Wow, I'm surprised we made that 50 minutes. So I don't know if it's any further questions, Hannah.
No further questions, Ben.
No.
But if, as we said, if anyone has, then by all means they can contact us directly. And I'll put a link. We'll put a link on to the. If people haven't registered for the 24th, we'll make sure that there's a link on the follow-up information as well. Okay then. I think we can bring that to a close. Thanks very much, Ben.
Thank you everybody for attending. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.